Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Epsilon 2022. I'm Preeti Pathak, MDO at IEEE SIESGST. Kiran, we can't hear you. No, you are not audible. We are honored to be your host for this session. IEEE SISGST Epsilon 2020 is back with its prime focus of imparting technical knowledge revolving around the theme of the Internet spectrum. We anticipate that the first session of the day, an introduction to blockchain, will provide you with plethora of information and introduce you to many new ideas. And now, for the first talk session of the day, we have under the IEEE track of our event an introductory session named Security for the Blockchain Age. Also, just a little bit information for the attendees. The tasks and quizzes we have prepared for each day of the symposium will put the participants' knowledge of the topics presented in each session to the test. Each action is worth a certain number of points, and players will be rated based on them in order to compete on the scoreboard. Everyone who participates will receive a certificate, and the best scorers will win exciting goodies. Now, let us begin with our most awaited session by welcoming our first guest speaker for the day. We have with us Mr. Sigmund Holtz, who is the current CSO of International Blockchain Consulting Group. He has led over 250 deals totaling 8 figures in value with projects focusing on layer 1 development, NFTs, and infrastructure projects. He enjoys lifting up others who are in the field of blockchain. We now call upon Mr. Sigmund to join us for the session.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Welcome, sir. We are very grateful to have you with us today and are looking forward to this incredible session. This session will last 90 minutes before the quiz. We will provide a link to the quiz in the chat box within the final 30 minutes of the session. So, without any further ado, we would like Mr. Sigmund Holtz to begin the session by throwing the light on the blockchain and its security and guiding our participants through the vast world of blockchain security. So you can continue.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'll just start by sharing my screen.
Yes,
Wonderful. Perfect. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to allow me to present today. It's an honor to be here, and it's definitely even more of an honor to be able to talk about one of my passions and what has really been my life for now the last period of time, which is blockchain in itself, but also discussing more specifically today the security of blockchain in this new modern era. Now, today more than ever, just to begin, blockchain is becoming more and more relevant in today's society than ever before. And the transition between Web 2 and Web 3 is becoming more and more prominent in time. And in what I believe, 5 to 10 years will be universal with mass adoption all over the world. So with that today, I'm going to be discussing blockchain and the security that basically underpins it, underpinning it in the sense of the individual, the corporation, and the network as an entirety on both a technical and on a high-level overview. So first of all, I'd love to just really quickly give a quick legal disclaimer. Only reason being is that anything that I say today is for informational purposes only. It should be used for education and information as such, and any material that I do say or any things I do cover is not any form of advice, whether that be financial, investment, tax, legal, or anything else. What is contained within the presentation, either verbal or written, it doesn't constitute a solicitation, recommendation, or endorsement of anything else, and is purely for educational and learning purposes only. Also, again, as with anything, including blockchain, there's a massive risk to investment. So nothing here as well is a solicitation of an investment of any kind. With that out of the way, let's begin. So today I want to cover a few main things. The first thing is an introduction. I want to discuss blockchain as an entirety, blockchain as a whole. I want to discuss its history, where it's come, and where it's going to be going in the future. I'd also like to accompany that with a quick introduction of myself, what I've been doing, what I've been working on, some of the companies that I'm honored to be a part of, most notably IVC, and furthermore, what I plan to also be doing to further blockchain in the future, whether that be giving back to the community, whether that be doing presentations such as this one, and beyond. Beyond the introduction, I want to discuss the start of Web3 and blockchain. What is blockchain in its core? These are some of the questions I'm going to be addressing, not only what is blockchain, but what is Web3? How does it differ from Web2? What are the key components of Web3? And then I also want to relate it back to everyone else that's listening today. How can you, someone maybe that is a student or a graduate student, or maybe you've just graduated from university, how can you get into blockchain? How can you use your skills to further yourself in blockchain, Web3, and alike? The next, I'm going to talk about blockchain securities and its terminologies. Most specifically, I'm going to be discussing really what is blockchain security? How can security occur on a network level? How can it occur on an individual level, a corporate level? What are some of those terms going to look like? And what can you do as well to protect yourself in this new era that we're seeing of Web3? The fourth point I'm going to talk about is the consensus mechanism. Now, the consensus mechanism is not just one mechanism, but really an underpinning of many different proof of something models is what I would call them. Proof of work, proof of stake, and other ways to validate transactions on a blockchain. And if you understand what that means, incredible. If you've never heard any of that before, don't worry, I'm going to be covering it. Next, I'll talk about the Ethereum blockchain and dive into the security specifically on the Ethereum blockchain, some past historic examples of some malicious attempts to hack the blockchain as well, or to cause it to take a deviation. And from there, we will continue. So let's start with an introduction and background. So my name is Sigmund Holtz. I originally got into crypto back in 2016. That's the first time I ever had heard of crypto, a coin, Bitcoin, Ethereum, anything like that. Now, I made the fatal mistake of not getting into blockchain when I first heard about it. And as many people, and maybe some of you as well that are listening to this, when I first heard about blockchain, I didn't actually really understand, what it meant. And I also didn't feel that I wanted to take the risk to learn about it. That was my fatal flaw. Now, fast forward 4 years later is when I again heard about Bitcoin in 2020, and when I purchased my first Bitcoin in the last quarter of 2020, only a few $100s at the time just to get started to it. And from that point on, I started to really understand that blockchain was the future. That blockchain basically enabled a peer-to-peer lending system on an international level in a way that's never seen before. And what we've seen from 2008 to today, and then from today, for example, what we're about to see forward, is truly incredible in the sense in comparison to Web 2. Very quickly, if you compare Web 3 to Web 2, right now, and you look at the years that of the internet development, right now we're in about 1997 or 1998 in comparison to when the internet was at that time. So we're not even at close to mass adoption with blockchain or Web3. And that's the most exciting part, because we're going to be getting there very soon. And it's still, early if people want to be able to get in and get involved. Once I bought my first Bitcoin in 2020, I really learned about it for around half a year. And then in 2021, I made it my life. And for over the last year and a half, every single day, I have been focusing on blockchain, cryptocurrency, NFTs, everything from involving them with companies like public entities, through doing sales and marketing, through helping in other mechanisms and providing value to the community. It's become my life, and I'm happy to discuss it a little bit more later. But the main thing I want to jump into today is the material. So the first thing, blockchain and Web 3.0. Let's begin. So I want to start with a quote by an individual by the name of Tyler Winklevoss. Now, some of you may have heard of this name before. Tyler Winklevoss, one of the Winklevoss twins, is a very prominent name in the Bitcoin community, but also in the cryptocurrency community. And he got into cryptocurrency very early on. He was one of the original members at Facebook. And then since leaving Facebook from Mark Zuckerberg, he formed a few companies in the cryptocurrency space and made his name here. And it reads, "We have elected to put our money and faith in a mathematical framework that is free of politics and human error." And this really, in a sense, summarizes what cryptocurrency and blockchain and Web3 is. It is really a system in which democratizes the current world in which we live in. It really breaks it down to its core and is free of any form of centralized governance. And in that sense, one could make the argument that that would be positive or negative, having a centralized entity. And in blockchain, it is very much the decentralized nature of it that pushes it forward in its current communities, because it is free of human error, it is free of politics, and it is, for the most part, or for a significant part at least, grounded in a mathematical framework, which at its pure essence is simply incredible. So let's start with the origin of the blockchain. Now, for those of you that already are very familiar with the blockchain and cryptocurrency, I will move past this very quickly, and by the end, it will get quite in depth. So do bear patience, please, if this is already something you're aware of. The origin of blockchain. So in 2008, just following the financial crisis in the United States with subprime mortgage lending, where we saw one of the worst financial crashes of this century so far, of this modern century. Satoshi Nakamoto, an pseudonymous person, created and released the Bitcoin white paper on October 31st. Now, this Bitcoin white paper was only just over 10 pages long, but yet it held the key and really started the future of what would be modern finance as we know it. And we're not even at the full scale of what modern finance is within the origins of blockchain. Now, the paper outlined was really in its pure state, defining a peer-to-peer electronic commerce system in which individuals can lend, borrow, send, and transfer money pretty much instantaneously for a relatively low amount of capital anywhere in the world, somewhat anonymously. And the reason I say somewhat, I'll come back to later, is it depends on it depends on a few things if the public key is known or connected to an individual, but I'll go into that a little bit further. Now, prior to the rise of Bitcoin, there actually was something prior to Bitcoin that was around, and it was by the name of eGold. And eGold was a lesser known pioneer of the digital financial space. eGold was developed prior to Bitcoin, and it was a method of transferring capital online in a digital currency. Now, eGold never took off, and it actually ended up coming down quite rapidly. Reason being is that eGold had been connected to different crime and fraud, and it was a way to basically transfer money without anyone knowing. And the government in the United States saw this very simply as something that couldn't stand. They saw eGold, and they basically, instead of targeting the people that were using eGold and the criminals, and it wasn't all criminal activity, instead of targeting them, they decided to target eGold as an entity. And targeting eGold as an entity led to its downfall shortly before the rise of Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin was different because Bitcoin wasn't connected to anything. Bitcoin's not a company. It's not a person. It's just a network. It's code. And eGold was a company. It was a company that was launched, and it had a physical corporate entity registered. That was registered. And because of this, it was very easy to track back to not only the corporation, but the individuals that own that corporation. And that's what led to its downfall. Bitcoin seemed to, ironically and very conveniently, rapidly really sprouted right after eGold, and they fixed the issue because they became a network. And this is something that is going to be critical as it really built the pillars for modern finance as we know it. It was the first popular implemented blockchain as we know. Since then, people such as Russian-Canadian entrepreneur Vitalik Buterin have created the Ethereum blockchain, as well as there's many others now that are obviously in the space. And today, there's over 22,000 cryptocurrencies or crypto tokens on different blockchains that are recognized by CoinMarketCap, which is incredible considering the time that Bitcoin and blockchain has been around. So let's break it down a little bit more. Today, within this scope, first of all, I'm going to talk about peer-to-peer borderless transactions. So in blockchain, Bitcoin, as well as any other blockchain for the most part, allow you to have peer-to-peer borderless transactions, which means that you can send money to anyone at any point in the world. And the way that it works is very simple, is that every user, and I'll discuss this a little bit later when we get to the security portion, has a public key and a private key. And your public key is like your name. So it is the way that you can identify on the internet. And this is going to become very important when I discuss the context of Web3 and blockchain in just a few minutes. So your public key is really what allows you and enables you, in a sense, to identify yourself and to also receive and send money. It's your, in a sense, your identity. Your private key, on the other hand, is your signature, which only you have. And with that, you can then sign transactions to send to anyone in the world, and it can be done in a digital and secure manner without ever needing to go to a bank or have a central mediary as well. Furthermore, blockchain is a permanent and immutable ledger, meaning that everyone can see everything on the blockchain. This is why when I said a little bit earlier, it's not only, for example, that it's anonymous, but it's also not anonymous. Because if someone knows what your public key is or what your name is, on the blockchain for simpler terms, they can very easily figure out everything that you know about you. This is why with Bitcoin, there is only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be mined. And that will be mined in the year 2140. And when that happens, for example, even now with the blockchain, because it's a decentralized immutable ledger, everyone in the community can see everything. If you have a public key, you can go and see how much money is there. You can see where you've transferred it. You can see what currencies it's in. You can see when they bought it. You can see when they transferred it. Everything is public. Nothing is hidden. The only thing that is anonymous is if people don't know who owns those wallets or those public keys or who has that money. But that's why we know there's going to be 21 million Bitcoin. That's why we know how much is in circulation, because everyone on the network knows how much money everyone has. Something that is not possible in current finance and something that is not possible in really any other area right now of not only finance, but in generally just on a global scale. The next point is encryption, just how blockchain is encrypted, something I'm going to dive into a little bit more here in a few seconds. Blockchain being encrypted can mean a few different things. It can mean, again, the general security of that blockchain. It can mean the security of how you interact with cryptocurrency, whether that be cold storage wallets, hot wallets, wallets that, for example, have longer or shorter seed phrases. That could have to do with, for example, when you look at the system of which really we validate transactions in the blockchain, proof of work, proof of stake, different levels of not maybe encryption, but rather the ability for people to override the network. And I'll discuss all of this in a few minutes. Verification mechanisms, which I just briefly touched on. Smart contracts. Smart contracts being something that are more relevant on Ethereum than any other chain right now, but are definitely going to become more relevant. And they started back with Ethereum's ICO back in 2015, 2016, before Ethereum took off with the first, I would say, more mainstream bull run of cryptocurrency in 2017. And finally, decentralization. Decentralization is, in a sense, a large part of the appeal to crypto, because it is not centralized and there's not a lot that a central entity could do if they wanted to in regards to really anything with the blockchain. Now, obviously, there are examples for, if you've been keeping up with the news, there's been some government actions in the United States against particular applications in the cryptocurrency space. That for better or for worse have happened. And however, there definitely is an element still of crypto that is fully decentralized that really enables users to not have this central controlling entity over them, which is good, but it's also bad in some cases as well. So let's start with Web 2 comparison to blockchain. Now, in Web 2, or just let's say in real life, you can own assets, right? I can own a house, I can own a car, I can own land, I could own information. This one might be a little bit harder to conceptualize, but if I have a piece of information that I, for example, own, or I have such a maybe like IP rights as well, that can be protected. So rights, information, assets, land, objects, any of that can be owned. Now, that ownership is not connected to the internet, even with blockchain aside, right? You can't say, oh, I own my land on the internet, right? Because the house you own, that is a deed, that's a contract, that's a written piece of paper that you obviously have. Now that piece of paper might be able to be put on the internet, but that doesn't mean that whoever has that piece of paper actually owns the home, right? It's whoever's name is on the piece of paper. It's whoever signed it in real life. So even if you take an image of that and put it on the web, that doesn't mean that you can own the house just from owning that digital image. Now, in Web 2, the only thing that you can own is a domain. So a domain name, for example, let's say google.com, right? Let's say apple.com, binanceus.com. Those are the only piece that you can own of the internet. Everything else is centralized, right? The images you own, you don't own them, right? The information, it's not yours. Everything else on the internet, you really don't own. If I, for example, my photo is at the beginning of this presentation. That photo is essentially mine. I took the photo, right? Or I had someone take the photo for me, but it's not my photo because when it's on the internet, anyone has access to it, right? And if I wanted, it would be very difficult for me to go back and try to essentially make sure that no one had that image. And if they wanted to use it, they couldn't anyway. This presentation, for example, I own this presentation, right? I'm the one that made this presentation, but if someone here is listening today and they took a screenshot of this slide, there's nothing I can do to basically say, hey, I own this. It's not copyrighted. And even if it was copyrighted or I had the rights to it, those rights wouldn't be represented as a digital entity. They would be represented as a form of contract or something that would be on paper, and then that could extend to the internet. Web3 changes this because in Web3, you can now own land. You can own the deeds to houses. You can own IP. You can own information. You can own NFTs. You can own art. You can own real estate. You can own anything that you couldn't own before. Now you can own in Web3. And that really is what Web3 is in essence. There's an endless possibilities to what can be owned. Your own money and currency, you can own it, right? For example, let's say even you have like US dollars in Web 2 and you have it, let's say in PayPal or just any other or service provider. That money is yours, but at any point, it's also controlled by a centralized entity, right? If they went out of business, there's nothing you could do about it. So your ownership is there, but it's limited. With crypto, I can have $10 on a hard wallet. And if you don't know what that is, I'll explain it in a second. And that hard wallet I could have, and that cryptocurrency is online. It's on the blockchain. And I own it. And I can prove that I own it. And no one can do anything about it. Web3 is endless, and it has endless opportunities. And this is especially true when we look at a little bit of history. So furthermore, we talked about Web 2. You can own domains. You can own, online records in a sense. You could say maybe information. Web 3 opens up much more. ENS domains. This is Ethereum naming service. This is very similar to domain names in Web 2, but this is actually for Web 3. So on the Ethereum blockchain, you can basically now connect names of companies or assets in real life or whatever you want to that blockchain. You can basically own the name on the Ethereum blockchain. So for example, my name's Sigmund. If I wanted, I could go buy the ENS domain Sigmund, which would be sigmund.eth. And then I would have the rights to that. No one else could take that name. And even if they said that they use the name, I would have the non-fungible token or the NFT to indisputably prove that I am the owner. The same thing with cryptocurrency. I can own cryptocurrency in the blockchain, and there's not a lot that other individuals could do about it, unless obviously they want to hack or anything like that. NFTs. Non-fungible tokens. You can own art, you can own rights, real estate, information, anything that's encapsulated within that NFT. It could be, for example, even a promotion of some sense. Now, there's lots of different examples of how companies are using NFTs to actually not only add value to the communities and the people that follow them and obviously buy their products and services, but also they can be used in a plethora of other ways that have utility for not only individuals, but also corporations. The metaverse. So the next point is the metaverse. And this is probably one of my favorite points in general, because the metaverse is really a way that you can now own land on the internet. So there could be a metaverse. Let's say, take Decentraland, for example, or Sandbox, either or. Now, Decentraland and Sandbox each have so many thousands of plots available to buy. Now, if I wanted, I could go purchase with my cryptocurrency that piece of land, and then that land that I own, I could start a business on. Right? I could connect that piece of land to my website, my Web 2 website, that domain that I own, right? And then what I could do is advertise by basically having different structures, and maybe I could have billboards. I could charge advertising fees to other people that are in the metaverse so that when they ever go buy my land or whenever they see the land or whenever they see the advertisement, they then are going to likely go to that website. And you can do this in a multilateral way. You can either charge other people or to have the advertising, or you can use it yourself. And the final piece is identity. And this is one of my favorites because identity in Web3 is something that no one has ever seen before. It actually allows for you to create different personalities, different identities, and develop them all at the same time. One of my favorites, and I heard him speak in Austin, Texas earlier this year. His name is Punk6529. And for those of you who don't know, CryptoPunks are an NFT that is one of the first NFTs in the space. And you can see his character here in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, this is an NFT. So for those that don't know, non-fungible tokens, these are uniquely identifiable tokens in a collection that are on a blockchain like Ethereum. So for example, this collection is 10,000 being CryptoPunks. And those CryptoPunks each basically went up for sale in 2017, 2018, and they were free. You could literally just go online, you could create one for free, mint it for free. And then what you could do, for example, is sell it if you wanted in the future. Today, this punk goes for around 300,000 to 700,000 US dollars. And I can explain why in the Q&A if you have any questions about why that price is so high. Now, what he did is he never revealed his personal identity. Instead, what Punk6529 did was buy a CryptoPunk, and he basically had this image, and he created a Twitter around it, which now has 310,000 followers. He then created an entire identity around it, a brand around it, and an image around it. And this became his online identity. So in the real world, he lived another life, and online, he lived an entirely different life. And it was completely anonymous. And in Web3, as I said, ENS domains is a big one, Ethereum naming service, or name service. Cryptocurrency, NFTs, the metaverse, and lastly, identity. These are really what make up Web3. And just to kind of summarize, Web3 is really the conglomerate of cryptocurrency being used as a point of commerce within not only the metaverse, but also the system and ecosystem that's being developed in modern finance. It is the underpinning of cryptocurrency as that central commerce platform, and people then building on top of it that really are building in either metaverses or building different projects or companies that allow for greater efficiency, effectiveness, or other benefits over Web 2. And it's a way that it can be done in a really impermeable, permanent, time-stamped, immutable way that is decentralized at its core. So Web3 and identity, just to summarize, to go very simple for those of you that don't know. So I'll use the example of Punk6529. Simply, you can open a MetaMask account. Not that I'm endorsing MetaMask, but if you go online and you go to MetaMask and you click download, you can download a hot wallet on your Chrome browser, on your Chrome extension, or you can even do it on your iPhone or your Samsung or any other phone that you have that's a smartphone. Now, that wallet is going to basically be your identity. That public key is going to be your identity on the blockchain. And then with that, you can fund it with cryptocurrency. You could then, for example, go to OpenSea, which is the second icon there. You could purchase an NFT like a CryptoPunk, and then you could go create an identity. You could go create a Twitter, a YouTube channel. You could go to different conferences or discussions. Punk6529 spoke at Consensus 2022 in Austin, Texas, right after Edward Snowden, one of the most famous people that is an advocate for decentralization and cybersecurity. Or not cybersecurity, my apologies, but really for decentralization and kind of freedom in a sense in the current market. So that's a quick introduction on Web3 and blockchain. Now what I want to do is discuss blockchain security and also terminology. There's a very famous saying, it is not your keys, not your coin. And this at its core is really the centralization, or not the centralization, but the crux or core of really security in blockchain. If you don't own the private key, which is the signature to any transaction, right? It's like the key to your house, right? I might know what your house looks like, but that doesn't mean I own your house. But if I have the key and I have the deed and I have your signature and I am you, well, that is in a sense the way that you could identify as owning something. So the saying is not your keys, not your coin, meaning if you don't own the keys to your wallet, if your coin is stored or your crypto is stored on a centralized exchange, do you really own it? And that's a question I want to discuss today. So encryption in the blockchain. The blockchain is at its core, a distributed open ledger. There are going to be 21 million Bitcoin. and there will never be one more. And all of these will be minted, or not minted, but they'll be put into creation, mined by 2140 in the 22nd century. Now, the distributed open ledger is really the core of everything because it allows each individual in the network to see everyone else. For example, on a very simple scale, let's say that there are 3 people in a room, and these 3 people all are going to enter into business with one another. And right off the bat, person 1 owes person 2 $20, and person 3 is there as well, but they're not involved in this first transaction. Person 1 can send person 2 $20, and then they could write it on a piece of paper. Negative $20 base accounting to person 1, positive $20 to person 2. Now, that in itself, that business is only conducted between individual 1 and individual 2. But individual 3 was able to see that transaction. It's very similar in the distributed open ledger because blockchain, everyone can see all transactions, even if I'm not a part of it, which previously in modern finance is something that couldn't be done. So if you go to, let's say, the Ethereum blockchain, the second biggest one, it has around 21% market dominance right now, and it has around a $200 to $250 billion market cap, wavering obviously as time goes on, which is very small actually compared to really the traditional finance sector. Now, you can go to a website called etherscan.io, and in Etherscan, you could type in anyone's address, even if you don't know who owns it, and you could find every single transaction that wallet has ever done. There's no hiding it. And that is really the point of security in blockchain, is that there is no hiding anything. There was ways in which people could try and get around it, and there are, and if there are questions about that, I'd be happy to dive into it. But the anonymity really is derived from the fact that I might not know who owns that wallet. And that is the point that really plays a role today. The second thing I want to talk about is the public key versus private key, which is, again, how you can identify really the signature from the name. I'll talk about multi-signature wallets. I have a few slides on these as well. Seed phrases, something that you definitely don't want to lose if you know what a seed phrase is, or if you have one. And I'll discuss some of the mathematics behind seed phrases, how they function, what they do, and furthermore. And then as well, hot wallets versus cold wallets, which is definitely a very interesting conversation itself. And then security, flaws, hacks, and a few other points. And lastly, blockchain bridges and DeFi applications. So let's start with looking at the distributed ledger system. Now, a distributed ledger system is really the one we see on the right. So we'll start on the left with a centralized ledger. The 4 different entities could be banks. They could be individuals. They could be governments, really whatever you want to say. And the way that they operate is that they each are going to enter into transactions. It could be a unilateral agreement with one party, or it could be bilateral or multilateral. But at the end of the day, the payment system would be kept, on one ledger for each individual entity, right? It'd be kept in their books. So if I'm a bank and I lend out $1 million, I obviously would be able to then write that on my accounting statements. That again, that would be something that we lent out. Assets, liabilities, you can go through all of that. With the other way, which is seen on the other side, even if people aren't interacting with other people, they can see everything. So it's very public, it's very not anonymous, and it allows for a lot of transparency, but it also allows for that anonymity at the same time. So this is a little bit more of a detailed diagram about how transactions actually work on the blockchain. So before I go through this image right here, let me really summarize what is happening just in general on the blockchain when you do really anything. When you're doing, like let's just say the blockchain in itself. Now, the blockchain itself operates in a few different ways. The first way is that each block is physically a block of data. It's a block of transaction hashes. It's a block that has all of the information for a set period of time. With Bitcoin, that could be 10 minutes. With Ethereum, it could be different. With another blockchain, it could be different once again. But the consistency is that every so often period of time, let's say X, you would have that be known. So with this, you have the information stored within the block. Now, for the transactions, let's take a look at this. So with the transaction, you have owner one's public key. So the public key is, again, that identifier, what people can obviously see. Now, let's say they want to send money to person number 2, okay? They're going to basically sign that signature, and they're going to sign it with their private key. So that private key that they obviously have is the kind of guarantee that, again, they're authentic, they're real, and the network then can see oh, person one actually signed this transaction. They want it to go through. So then what happens is it gets verified that the public key is there. So the owner one's public key, they know that that's correct. And then right here in the second box, you can see owner one signed that transaction. So yep, it's from person one to person two, and they obviously signed that transaction, so it has to be real. And then owner two could then basically do that again, where they're going to be sending funds to another person, another entity. So they want to, again, verify that that transaction is going to be happening. And thus they sign that, that transaction. Now, each time that a transaction is signed, each time that it is verified, you will have what is going to be a hash, or more commonly known as a transaction hash. And this transaction hash holds all of the data for that individual transaction. So if I send someone $20, I would have my public key there that would be seen. You'd have the other person's public key. You would obviously know which direction the funds were going. They were going from myself to them. And then you would basically see that I signed it. You couldn't see my private key because otherwise you'd have access to sign other things, and that would be your funds as well that would be compromised. And then as a result of that, what we would basically have is that system in itself, that one hash and that one piece of data would be part of the blockchain. And then when that block is finished and the network verifies it, so the network is, I'll explain in a second. This can be either proof of work or proof of stake. The network is the community in a sense. And when the whole network verifies, or a part of the network verifies that, oh, Sigmund sent person X $20. Yep, it's legitimate. A few people will verify. Yep, look, his signature's there, his name's there, the contract's good. They're kind of like that third person in my earlier analogy that is watching the transaction happen. And when that is done, then it is going to be validated. It'll go through. And then when that block of data, everyone's transactions, there could be many people transactions there. When that block of data and that block is done, then it will basically be, for lack of a better term, just really permanently put on the blockchain. Like no one else can ever tamper with it. Then the next block will start, and so forth and so forth. Now, the further ago your transaction was, obviously the harder it would be to reverse it. There is a possibility to reverse transactions. However, the only real possibility of that is if there was a fork or there was a hack in which more than 50%, so 51% of the network was compromised, meaning that then someone could basically change that data inside that block and create a parallel blockchain, which is linear. Blockchains are linear, right? A parallel blockchain that would then basically be different from the original one. And there's ways to reverse that, and there's actually a lot of examples in history of when that's happened, but that's something we can discuss in a little bit. The next point I want to talk about is multi-signature wallets. Multi-signature wallets are definitely a key feature in blockchain. They basically are like a vault in a bank. A vault in a bank could be holding, a significant amount of money. And obviously, no matter how big that bank is, there's not only one person that's going to be able to access it, and most likely no individual can access it. Reason being is malicious intent. If someone wanted to, let's say, unlock the vault and take the money for themselves, there would be no checks and balances that would stop them from doing that. So a multi-signature wallet is basically, at its core, a number of different people that would have the key to that wallet, but the wallet would need to validate the signatures from so many of those keys. So for example, in this example here, we have a 2 of 3 multi-signature wallet, meaning there are 3 keys in total, and any 2 of them can unlock it. 1 key won't unlock it, but 2 will. So with this, for example, there's a number of combinations that you could have of different possibilities. You could have person 1 and 2, person 1 and 3, and person 2 and 3. So there'd be 3 different combinations or ways, actually 4 if you include all of them. There'd be 4 different combinations of people that could unlock the wallet. 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 1 and 3, and 1, 2, and 3 all together. You wouldn't be able to do it with just user 1, 2, or 3 individually, as it's a multi-signature wallet. Now, without this happening, you cannot sign the transaction. The transaction cannot be signed, and therefore it cannot be basically put onto the blockchain and forever really minted there or put in as a permanent record. Now, the reason that this is useful is a few different reasons. The first reason that something like this is very useful is that companies or businesses or maybe just partnerships, LLCs, whatever it might be, that are dealing in crypto might have a lot of money. They might have, let's say, $100,000, $1 million, or even more. And obviously trust is number one, right? You have to have trust and integrity in whatever you do. But in some cases, there might not be trust that one person might not act maliciously and have a conflict of interest with their own intents versus the intents of the group of people that are going to be signing the transaction. And that is why, for example, we would have such a focus being really derived or driven to how this would actually operate as a whole. Next, I want to talk about seed phrases. So seed phrases are one of the ways that people can access their funds on a hot wallet or on a cold wallet. So seed phrases normally come in two different lengths or sizes or variations, a 12-word seed phrase and a 24-word seed phrase. Now, these seed phrases are basically the alphabetic way of looking at a private key. So your private key, as I said before, is your signature. Right? That's the signature to the blockchain. Your seed phrase is like a 12-word or 24-word pattern, or like a very long passcode, for a sense, that allows you to basically have access to the private key. So if I have access to the seed phrase, that basically means that I have access to the private key. I might not know what the private key is, but that seed phrase basically, on what we see in more technical terms, is that we see the seed phrase. If you have it, you basically validate that you are also the owner of the private key. So then you can use the private key to sign transactions. Your seed phrase won't actually sign transactions, but it is directly correlated to your private key. So it's basically a way to simply hold it. The reason being is that the private key is quite a interesting alphanumeric string of numbers and letters. It is normally quite long. It is normally, many tens of digits long, and is normally random. Uppercase, lower cases, numbers, letters. You can't remember it. And also, if you write it down, let's say you wrote it on a piece of paper and you stored it somewhere. If anyone got access to that piece of paper, even if they weren't you, they could impersonate your identity online. And what I mean by that, might not sound too bad. Okay, people impersonate me all the time, right? People could take my identity. They could take my, social security number, my driver's license. That doesn't matter. Well, they can also take your funds, because online, in the digital world, whoever has access to those keys are the people that have control of really everything. And that's why I started this second segment of a few here with the quote, "Not your keys, not your coin." Because if you don't have that piece of paper, that is your identity. That number is your identity at the end of the day. So that's something that's very critical at its core. Now, that being said, the other advantage of a seed phrase is that it breaks up the private key into up to 24 different pieces. What I mean by this? Well, the seed phrase represents a private key. We already know that. And just to be very clear, the odds of guessing a private key are around 1 and 2 to the power of 256, which if you have a little bit of math background, or even if you don't, you would know that that is astronomically high. It's greater than one Google, if you will, or even nearly a Googleplex. So it's incredible how large that number is. It basically is impossible to guess, considering the complexity of it, or even to brute force. And obviously, there may be ways to do that in the future with quantum computing, and I'm happy to get into that as well. But right now, that's simply impossible. But the seed phrases are simpler ways of looking at your private key. You can have 12 words. These words are chosen from a list of 2,048 words for Bitcoin, for example. Some are going to deviate from this. The words are very simple, like bat, car, hat, door, open, away, tennis, things like that. Very simple, 3-letter to 6-letter, normally words that you might have. I can't remember if there's 7 letters as well, but very simple. There's also non-repeating, so you're never going to get 2 words that are ever the same, and you're never going to get 2 words that are close together, such as man or men, which is only 1-letter difference. So they're all distinct, and all of those words are unique. So of those 2,048 words, you would basically select 12 randomly, but then you'd also need them in the correct order. For a comparison's sake, the lottery normally in most countries, it might differ from country to country, but in the United States, normally there are 50 numbers. And of those, you need to pick 7 out of order. So you just need to pick the 7 that are going to come up. Of the 50, any 7, and you win. And that being said, many people don't ever win. There's a 1 in 300 million chance of winning that. With this, there are really in comparison, 2,000 words instead of 50. So there's over 40 times more words, and you're also picking double the words, and then they have to be in order. Having all the right words to seed phrase, but having two of them mixed up will not grant you access. Now, for BTC, this is basically originally seen in the Proposal 39 or BIP 39, which if you look up, you can get some more information on seed phrases, how they function, how they operate, how they work as well. And again, these are really representations of your private key. So at the core, your seed phrase can be seen here, a human readable version of your private key in a sense. It's a way that you can break up your private key. Now, the other thing I didn't mention that's actually a benefit to this is that because you can break up your private key into 12 words, you can store it uniquely. You can store all 12 words on one piece of paper, and if you have that piece of paper, you have your identity. Or you can split it into 6 words and 6 words. And now you have to have both pieces of paper in order to have the combination. So in a sense, unless you have both pieces of paper, you do not have access to funds in the wallet. And thus your private key is, in a sense, or your identities/funds are a little bit safer because there's not one single point of failure as there would be if you kept it all the same. So once you have your seed phrase, it's basically a readable version of your master private key. This is a little bit more complicated than just a single one, but then you have extended private keys, the public keys, and then you can start to have the transactions to the addresses. So the public key to the address and so forth and so forth. And the seed phrase is the core of this. Now, it's very important to remember that your seed phrase is only one way, your private key is another. So even if you lose your seed phrase, you can still use your private key to get into a wallet and security in blockchain. If you don't have your seed phrase, you can use your private key. If you don't have your private key, you can use your seed phrase. Or you can have both. Very quickly, I want to just touch on the difference between hot wallets and cold wallets. The reason being is that this is really important in terms of individual security of the blockchain. And in a few more slides, I'm going to really dive into some more technicals on just network security in general. So hot wallets could be desktop wallets, mobile wallets, web wallets, really anything, for example, that is online. So the risk to a hot wallet is that your private key, like your signature, is stored online. So if your computer is compromised, then someone can get into the password to get into your computer and get into your wallet. Such wallets could be MetaMask for Ethereum, Phantom for Solana, and there's many, many more. Ronin wallets, which are really focused more around Axie Infinity as well. So that's obviously a game, play to earn game in the space. But all of these have their private keys online, so they can be easily compromised. I have many friends that have unfortunately lost a lot of money due to holding money in their wallets and having their PC compromised. So normally, most people would hold very little money comparatively, normally 1 to probably 10 or 20% of their total crypto holdings. I would recommend to hold online. The remainder I would hold in a hardware wallet if you don't need it. Now, the benefit of hot wallets is that they're very easy to access, super easy to get to your desktop, super easy to get to your mobile phone, super easy to get to the web. You can literally open your phone, you can open your computer, it's right there, you can send the money, just like PayPal or any other application. Cold wallets are normally more difficult because you have, for example, the paper wallet, which is just a QR code or a code on a piece of paper. You can get these from Bitcoin ATMs as well. The only way to get in is if you have that piece of paper or you know the numbers on that piece of paper. Or the hardware wallet, where, for example, in essence, it is normally locked away somewhere very safe, and you also have a seed phrase to accompany it and a password to the hardware wallet. So you have to get into the hardware wallet. You normally only have 3 to 5 guesses, depending on the brand, Ledger or Trezor, or a few others. Now, that being said, if you get that code wrong 3 times, it could lock you out. So you have that code, you have your then seed phrase that you could put in as well. You could the private key, which is obviously stored on that device. So with the cold storage wallets, this is also very important, is that the private key never ever leaves that device. It never goes online even for a second. It never touches the computer. So the only way that someone can hack a hardware wallet was if it's briefly connected to your computer and your computer is compromised and you are basically prompted by a hacker to essentially sign a transaction. You don't realize what you're signing and you click sign because you have it connected at that point. Other than that, you're very secure. Now, security in terms of DeFi applications. So DeFi, for those of you that don't know, is decentralized finance. It is decentralized exchanges, it's portals, bridges, other applications in the space, play to earn, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of different people that are currently building very unique things online. Now, decentralized exchanges such as Uniswap, PancakeSwap, or many others are something that we currently see in the space. So they are normally based around a blockchain. Uniswap is based around Ethereum. PancakeSwap is based around, on the other hand, Binance Smart Chain, BSC. Now, they are both the largest of each blockchain, and actually what's more commonly referred to as a king. And that king is normally the largest exchange or centralized exchange on the blockchain. So for Ethereum, it's Uniswap. So you could literally open a MetaMask wallet. You could go online. You could send $100 onto Uniswap, and you could switch between Ethereum, and you could also have then maybe switch to US dollars, like USDC, USDT. You could switch to a form of Bitcoin, which isn't Bitcoin. It's actually would be wrapped with an ERC20 label, so it would be on the Ethereum blockchain. So you could basically switch between different assets very easily. Beyond that, you also have bridges. So bridges such as Portal, as well as, there's a lot of other ones in the space, Bridge Network, and many others. This can basically be something that allows people to go chain to chain. So, for example, we have the Ethereum blockchain, then we have Avalanche, then we have Binance, and many, many others. You have Polygon, and so many more. So, if you look at these 3 or 4 chains, for example, what you can see is that if you want to, let's say, build something on Polygon, or you want to build something on Binance, but all of your money is in Ethereum, that's cool. Your Ethereum is on a different chain. So that chain that I'm referring to, being the blockchain, is the blocks of data. And Ethereum will have a different chain than Polygon, than Avalanche, than any other blockchain in general. So in order to get your funds to the other blockchain, you have to have a way to basically go what's called cross-chain. And cross-chain is something that is fairly new in the space. It's not the most new thing, but it's definitely very, very new in terms of being used. And there's many supporters of it, and there's also many people against it. One of the most notable being Vitalik Buterin, who actually doesn't believe in cross-chain and believes in more of the singular blockchain to kind of govern them all, most likely being Ethereum. Now, bridges basically are able to take crypto from one chain to another. So you could be on Binance, and then you could basically go to Ethereum. And it would allow you through either a liquidity pool, or there's actually many forms of chains. I won't dig into it too much on this presentation, but if you have questions about it, I'll have my contact details at the end, and I'll also answer some questions. As well as that, some might have lower transaction fees. Right now, Ethereum is very expensive. If you want to send $20 or any amount of money from person A to B, it could be between $1 and $30 to send that $20. It doesn't make sense to pay $50 when you're only sending 20. NFTs and utility. Ethereum is the most notable blockchain for NFTs. It makes up the majority of the NFT marketplace and is quite large in terms of what they're doing. On the other hand, the Solana blockchain is very much catching up to it, but it's still not quite there in terms of the same level of Ethereum. So maybe you want to mint NFTs on Solana. Maybe you want to own assets or land in a metaverse, but all of your money is in Ethereum. The way that you can get there is by going cross-chain. Now, when you go cross-chain between one chain and another chain, and you're making that convergence between the two, or divergence between the two, you're at the most risk to an attack, to losing funds, just susceptible to anything going wrong. When you are going cross-chain, there is more likely ability for an attack, considering that you're normally using a mechanism such as a liquidity pool, in which lots of funds from different chains are already basically placed there. But again, considering the fact that there's so much money in one place, they're not normally common for attackers to try and get into, because if they're able to get into it, they're often able to get away with anywhere between 10 million and hundreds of millions of dollars. On the other hand, if you were looking to make, if a hacker wanted to make money, they're not going to look for individual people because they might only have $5 in their wallet. But they know that these locations in blockchain have a significant amount of funds, and they always have to have them, because if they don't, then they don't operate, and that bridge or that exchange doesn't make money because they basically take a transaction fee. And then finally, with bridges, crypto native assets. So you might just want to switch between USDC on one blockchain to another. You might want to secure it to send it to another wallet. There's lots of reasons why someone would want to go cross-chain. So here's some examples of just, again, more applications in that sense. You can have asset specific. The one I'll just touch on is Wrapped Bitcoin. So Wrapped Bitcoin basically being Bitcoin, right? It models the price of Bitcoin. It follows the charts of Bitcoin, but it's actually on the Ethereum blockchain. And there's no Bitcoin on the Ethereum blockchain because Ethereum is only for Ethereum tokens. That chain of data can only have ERC20 tokens is what they're called, or ERC721 or 1155. But for the most part, it would only be ERC20 in terms of the crypto. Now, that being said, the Bitcoin is wrapped basically in a ERC20 wrap, which basically moves, for lack of a better term, moves that Bitcoin to the ERC blockchain, and then it can basically be seen there on Ethereum. There's chain specific, as I was saying, Avalanche, Binance, Harmony, Polygon, you have Rainbow Bridge, Ronin Bridge. There's so many more. Wormhole, I don't think they're around anymore. I think they rebranded. And then there's application specific, and then there's just generalized ones as well, Chainlink, so forth, so forth. So that being said, there's then, and I just wanted to put this in as well, an Ethereum DeFi map. Now, I didn't create this. I don't want to take credit for it. The name is at the top as well. And also with any sources throughout this presentation, they're not cited at the end, but if you would like them, I do have files and records of all of them. So if anyone's curious where some of the images came from or the specific data or some of the other parts and pieces, happy to also elaborate on that. So the Ethereum DeFi map, this just gives you an idea. You have stable coins right here in the middle, including DAI being one of the major ones, as well as USDC. And then obviously there's a few others, USDT. You then have lending, basically avenues such as Maker, Aave, Compound being kind of the major three. Custody being the wallets. These are all the wallets you can have: Coinbase wallet, MetaMask wallet, Trust wallet, many others. MetaMask being by far the most popular. Then you have trading. So again, different trading platforms that you can utilize, such as Uniswap being the largest. Curve and a few of the others, Balancer, having different functionalities. Some letting you have leverage, some letting you swap. DYDX right here being one of the more popular ones in terms of, again, allowing for leverage and more professional trading. And then there are asset management tools, derivatives, analytics like CoinGecko, so forth and so forth. But that gives you the main idea. So finally, I want to just briefly touch on the consensus mechanism. This is probably the most complicated or second most complicated part. And then I have a very quick one slide on section 4. So not too much more in that sense, but I want to first of all go through the background. So we know that blockchain is a decentralized ledger. It's something I've already talked about many times throughout this presentation. We know it's a network that ensures and validates that the next block in the chain is the singular and only true version of itself. This is really critical because, as I said earlier, there is no centralized entity to basically bring everything to kind of one point, right? Everything is decentralized. So because that's the case, because things are decentralized, it's about the network and community to validate it. Now with Ethereum, there might be a certain number of transactions that you need to have in order to have something occur or go through. With Bitcoin, it might be different. Bitcoin is often a little bit slower than Ethereum and a few of the others, as the network is a little more clogged and it's not as fast in terms of transactions per second. But the point is that the network needs to verify it. This can happen in one of a plethora of different ways. And the reason it happens, just to touch on this first, is that the really grounding principle of blockchain is that it's difficult for someone to overthrow or derail a system. That chain, the only way to overrule it is if you have more than 51% of the voting power. Ironically, it's similar to a company. If you have 51% ownership of a company, you can do whatever you want. Well, within the law. You can do whatever you want, right? It doesn't matter what other shareholders really think because you have the majority. It's the same thing with blockchain. If you have the ability to become the majority of the validators on the blockchain, it doesn't matter what anyone else says because you have the ability to really overpower it or control it. Now, the consensus mechanisms, the most famous two are called proof of work and proof of stake, formerly abbreviated as POW and POS. There's also then proof of elapsed time, burn, capacity, activity, delayed POS. There's so many other ones, practical by Azanite. There's so many that can be utilized, but the main two being proof of work and proof of stake. Now, proof of work is probably the largest and most notable, and people are moving away from it because there's some environmental impacts and it's quite energy intensive, but I'll now get into explaining how these work. So let's start with, for example, just the consensus mechanism. Any consensus mechanism is where you have the majority of people align. It could also be known as a consensus protocol or a consensus algorithm. And it basically enables distributed systems to work together and stay secure. This could be like similar to database nodes, application servers, or enterprise infrastructure. So if you're still not grasping this context, think about it in the sense of, let's say Web 2. Take a database. Take Google Drive. When I go on Google Drive, although it's not the exact same, when I go on Google Drive and I edit a document, right? I edit documents, whatever I'm typing. That information is being basically sent to the cloud, and then it's basically being sent down to every other user that's using that document at that time. So it's editing nearly in real time, nearly it's editing in live. Now, the reason that's important is because if I was editing that document and all of a sudden you had someone else that couldn't see that I was editing that document, but they were trying to work on it too, we might have overlaps, we might not know what each other are thinking. The document is broken. There's no consensus over what the final true version of the document is because I don't know what they're doing. This is very similar to application servers, right? If you have a server, you upload something, that will get continuously updated, and anytime you request to pull data from that server, you're going to get the same data every time as long as that time is identical. In the future, the data might look different because the server would have been edited or changed by any one of the different individuals or nodes that are on it. And lastly, enterprise infrastructure, once again, in kind of the corporate structure we see. So at its core, consensus is a general agreement reached by the network. You need 51% of the nodes or 51% of the validators to agree and basically, you need 51% to overrule it if it was a hack. That is the only way you can get around it. Now, this has happened twice. It's happened many more times than twice. It's happened most notably with Ethereum, and this is why there's two tokens. So if you have your computer, or maybe if your phone open, you can go to CoinMarketCap. And in CoinMarketCap, you can search Ethereum. And likely right now, if we're lucky, you'll see Ethereum being at $2,000. But if you go and you search Ethereum Classic on your computer, you'll see a very different price, a very similar looking description and token, but a different color symbol, a very different price, a different volume and market cap. This is because Ethereum had a hard fork when there was a potential hack or attempt to override the system. And in a few minutes here, I will explain on more of a technical level of how this can be done, how it has been done, and how people attempt to do it. But the main point or main part of the day, it is basically a way in which people can override the system. And if they can take that linear blockchain, and then they can basically replicate it and get the network to agree that their version, whatever they want to change, they want to make themselves millionaires, they want to make themselves billionaires, they can do it on the block. And then they basically get the network, because they have 51% of it, to essentially say, yeah, this is legitimate, this is the blockchain, and then they keep building. And the further and further, the more blocks that are built, the more permanent that becomes. It's on a scale from, not permanent until it's published to infinitely permanent, or nearly infinitely back to the first block. Because if you wanted to, let's say, undo that block, let's say you're on block 1000, okay? You're mining, and block 1010 is malicious. Someone overthrew the system, they had most of the network. They then changed the information in that block to make whatever they wanted happen. Undo something in that block, or redo something, or make themselves have so much money. They do it, okay, cool. And then it gets stamped. Now, it can be undone if the network realizes and quickly as a consensus agrees, this is not right, we need to go back to the other one. But if you're then, let's say, at 1200 blocks, you now have to go back 90 blocks just to undo it. You can't undo that blockchain. It's all a chain. It's all a chain for a reason. So you would have to undo all 90 blocks to come back to it, which is going to be very difficult. So at some points, people say we will do what's called a fork. We let the hacker, in a sense, have that malicious line, right? And we let that run as its own blockchain. But the community basically says, if it's discovered too late, we don't recognize it. It's not the official Ethereum. And then they basically replicate it again, hard fork it, which is then the proper chain that represents what actually is true without the hacker's malicious intents. And what basically happens very quickly is all the people basically move to the other one. The price of the token and the blockchain becomes irrelevant, and no one really ever uses it anymore. So the money that person had is either very quickly worth nothing, or it just doesn't make as much of a difference as it would if they had not noticed it. Now, proof of work basically utilizes hashing operations, more specificlically SHA-256 hash functions. Now, I'm happy to dive into this in a little bit more detail after, but I think I can dive into a little bit of detail now as well. So it's executed by miners that are basically, in a sense, looking to, at a very simple level, solve mathematical algorithms. Similar to a guessing game, but not quite. More of a brute force trial and error. And in this way, we can validate transactions. So this is now the math behind Sigmund sends you $20. Congratulations. How do you know that that's legitimate? How do you know that Sigmund didn't send $20 and then immediately send the same $20 to someone else before that person got it? And then I created, 20% or $20 out of nothing. And proof of work is one way to do that. So there's 5 different points you need to know. You have the block version number. This is like the rules. You're at block 1000, okay? This is the rules of the ball game that you're playing in. This is how we know the game that you have. The bits is the target number. I'll explain what this means in a second. The nonce is the random number produced by the miner. And then the Merkle root hash is basically for security. It is a hash produced by all of the information in that block, which is less relevant to today's discussion, but I'm happy to discuss if needed. So how it basically works is this. You basically have a hash, and then you have a hash of a hash. So you have the SHA-256 hash function. You basically are going to get, one way or another, to simplify it, a 256-bit number. And that number, for example, is going to be produced by the nonce. That's going to be produced by the miner. They're going to be basically producing these random numbers, right? These random numbers are going to be generated, the nonces. These are going to be produced by miners. So miners, they have their computers. They're randomly producing numbers. Okay, so they produce a number, okay? And then what we have is we have a bit, and that is the target number. And these are astronomically long numbers. Normally they're, going to be hundreds, sometimes they could be even 100 digits long or more. 100 digits, 200 digits long. Very, very, very large numbers. And then what you have is that you need to basically have that nonce or that random number be less than or equal to the target number. And when that happens, you validate that that transaction is correct. You validate that that is true. The reason being is that when that number that is generated, that nonce is generated, if it is less than the target number, it means that all the parameters are correct. There is a solution. It is correct. Everything has been validated. It is possible to have everything be correct, and it is. And then that block is done. Now, if you, for example, are higher than that target number, it basically says that, this might not be legitimate. There might be ways that this doesn't happen. Now, to give you an idea of how hard it is, because it sounds quite simple, let me just give you an analogy. Let's say, for example, you have the number 0 to 10. Now, the target number that is randomly, it's not randomly, but it's a bit, and that bit is correlated on a few other factors, which are probably beyond the scope of the presentation, but that bit is a target number. Let's say the target number is 3. I don't know that. My computer will basically produce numbers. They'll produce numbers 9, 5, 2. Now, if they produce 9, they're going to check, okay, is this less than the target number? No, it's not. Okay. And then you're going to then have another number, 5. Is it less than 3? No, it's not. 2, is it less than or equal to 3? Yes, it is. Then I know that it's validated. What basically is happening in proof of work is this is being done, but the numbers are so astronomically large, and you're looking for such a small range of numbers that it normally takes around 4 billion plus times to get it correct. It's an astronomically. So for the Genesis block, it took 4.295 billion times or odds rather of getting it correct. So if there's a number that is, let's just say, again, 100 digits long, a billion guesses is actually not that much in comparison to be able to get it, because you're looking for normally a number that is very, very small in comparison to that. It's like looking for, let's say, the number 5 or less, but your scale is 1 to 1,000,000. So you're going to have to guess, thousands and thousands of times, tens or hundreds of thousands of times before you get that to prove it. So that's proof of work. Now, the way that it works on a statistical level is that the largest number generated would be 2 to the power of 256 minus 1, because we start with 0. So 0 is the first in a sense. So that's why we have the minus 1. The smaller the target number is that is produced by the bit or that bit, which is not, it's kind of like a compact form of that number in a sense. That bit, the smaller the target number is, it's going to be harder to validate because there is a smaller window of correct numbers or possible combinations that produce it. So you're basically creating a random number of a nonce. That nonce is checking in the system, and then whatever the outcome is, if it's less than that number, it validates it. And as the target number increases, the greater number of valid numbers are present. So therefore, we can conclude there's an inverse relationship between the target number in proof of work and, for example, the odds or times it would be needed to take to actually validate that transaction. That's an inverse relationship. And the statistical way to write it is H block nonce less than or equal to the target. I didn't add the equal sign there, but again, it would be, what is the probability that that actual nonce is going to be less than the bit that is actually produced? And really, if you look at this at a more granular level, it's a production of zeros. The numbers that you're going to be looking for with that target number normally have 20 plus zeros at the front of it, sometimes even more. I think it's actually 100 plus zeros. So it's 100 zeros you need in basically binary code. So 0 or 1, you need 100 zeros. That's very similar to this. So the odds, just to give you an idea, are similar to really like flipping a coin heads just an enormous amount of times that you couldn't even fathom. So this is another way to look at it. You have the start, you propose a new block, you propose, let's have transactions. These transactions are going to occur. We render all of the transactions. They combine in hash. You have the hash number, and then we start testing it. The bits start basically, they have, for example, that target number. The nonces start producing numbers. Those numbers are then basically checked. If they're less than or equal to the bit, it's verified, and the POW is solved. If not, it repeats until it's solved. And then when it is solved, a mining reward is issued. Now, this is really important because the mining reward is the way in which people benefit from mining on the blockchain. So, for example, if you're mining on the blockchain, you then can benefit very easily if you're able to produce I guess you could say, direction towards solving this math problem at a very elementary level. And that reward for Bitcoin is currently 6.25 Bitcoin per block. So every block, every 10 minutes, 6 Bitcoin are rewarded. Now, 6 Bitcoin currently today is worth around, give or take, 150,000 US dollars every 10 minutes. So it's an exorbitant amount of money. And the last Bitcoin will ever be mined in 2140. So a very long time from today. But every 4 years, the reward goes in half. So the Bitcoin reward goes from 6.25 next year very soon, in just a few years here, I think 2024, 2023, you're going to see it go down to 3.125 Bitcoin per block. Finally, proof of stake to finalize and pretty much wrap up here. We have a few more slides. Proof of stake is where the block creator or the person that validates the block is chosen by a random algorithm that's based on the amount that the user has staked. So you stake funds into a pool, you then have a percent of that pool, and then that is the probability, give or take mathematically, that you are going to get to basically validate and create that block. Now, there is no block reward for proof of stake, but instead you get a transactional fee. That's why Ethereum is trying to move to proof of stake, because Ethereum's gas fees for all the transactions that are happening on what we see right now with proof of work, it's not only hurting the environment, but it's taking lots of energy. Comparative to the size of the industry, it's taking a lot of energy, not compared to the modern the historic traditional financial sector like the stock market and their emissions, but compared to the size that they have, it's quite notable. And then finally, the security is derived from the fact that no one person is going to have staked 51%, because that would be in essence billions or tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars. Most likely in the billions or tens of billions. So unless you own more than half of that, you do not have control of that blockchain, and there's nothing that can be done. No rewards, obviously, for making a block. It's only transactional fees. It's more cost effective, and it is less energy consuming. So proof of work versus proof of stake at its very essence here. You can see proof of work on the left. It's an individual computer trying to solve a problem, trying to figure out, is the nonsense created actually meaningfully creating something that is going to be less than or equal to the target number that would be described. And then the second piece of that is proof of stake, where you have a network of computers, all with staked rewards that then at random are chosen to validate and create that block and thus receive transactional fees. Finally, so that's really a wrap on the main 3 topics. The last one I have here is just one single slide, which goes into Ethereum security. And I actually got this from an academic paper on the I think it's IEEE website you can find, and it basically dives into what would happen if a security breach happened on the Ethereum blockchain, or what could happen, and more in the sense of theory. So I'll explain what this means. It looks quite complicated, but it's quite simple. So what we basically see here is an honest chain and an adversarial chain. An adversarial chain being someone that has a malicious intent to basically attempt to hack into it. Now, B0, B1, beta, whatever you want to call it, that is going to be each block for the honest chain. H is going to be the height of each of those, and K being the period of time in regards to the adversarial chain as well. And then the delta W being the difference between the amount of blocks that have been mined and validated on the adversarial chain, the difference between that and the honest chain. So you start with obviously B negative infinity, you go to B negative 1, B 0, and then you first of all have an attempt to hack. So you have someone that has gained access to the network, that has the ability to change something about the network to where they want it to be their own intent. Now, that being, let's say, B1, or beta 1. Now, that, for example, is the first malicious attempt. So what will be done is a lot of miners in proof of work would go to that to validate it, right? There's obviously transactional rewards. There's obviously a reward if you validate it. So the effort is going to be directed there. Now, the reason why is because the delta W is equal to 1. So the difference between the number of actual blocks on the adversarial chain versus the honest chain is 1. So people will naturally flock to that one because there's a higher probability that they're going to be able to get the correct, because at that period of time, there's not been a corresponding block on the honest chain. So it diverges. You have these two chains now. Now, as soon as you have that happen, let's say you have then the honest chain kind of continue that point of view, or continue that. We obviously see that would be somewhat of a fork. You can kind of see the fork here as well. This basically being where B1, where you now have the case that this is the honest chain. This is done properly. There's no malicious hacks. There's nothing attempted. Everything, all the data is correct. Now at this point, your delta is 0. So there's basically no incentive for any validator to go to either place, and this continues. The point of this moreover being is that the faster that someone can basically figure out that this has happened, the faster that it can be reversed. And this goes back to the idea that the farther in time you get that, the larger the value on the adversarial chain, the harder it is to reverse it, because you have to undo those transactions, or you have to force hard fork and let that adversarial chain just continue, but basically deem it worthless, and have everyone basically return to the honest chain. And what the theory was, and this is in the academic paper that I took this from, and happy to source it if anyone needs after would like me to as well, or point you in the direction of it to learn more. The point is that the people that are going to be looking at this as an entirety most likely are going to believe that after an equal amount of blocks are mined on the on-chain, that will be the way in which the validators move, considering that would be recognized, noticed, and that the adversarial chain would basically be stopped by network consensus to basically agree that is not the correct version that we see. So a little bit of detail there. Happy to go into some more later, but I didn't want to go too in depth. So just to conclude what we talked about today, really as we kind of come to the end of the 90 minutes. First of all, I'll give you an introduction of myself, obviously based on what I've done in blockchain. What is Web3 and blockchain, looking at identity versus ownership versus rights, IP, land, NFTs, cryptocurrency, commerce, and much more. We looked at blockchain security and its technologies on an individual, a corporate, and governance level. We looked at how it can be both private and public and anonymous and non-anonymous, or have lack of anonymity at the same time. We discussed the different versions of consensus mechanisms, being proof of stake and proof of work. The main two I discussed. There are more, but the main two. And then finally, we discussed Ethereum, blockchain, and the security as well. So with that, I want to leave with one quote, just as we hit the 90-minute mark here. And then I would like to answer any questions that people might have, and love to be able to kind of share any more information that people want. So to leave you on this, a quote famously said by Satoshi: "If you don't believe me or don't get it, I don't have time to try and convince you. Sorry." The relevance of this quote, although it might seem very dull and somewhat mundane and simple, is that this is going to be the future. One way or another, blockchain will become the future. It is the question of, are people going to take the leap now and trust that it is? And if they're not, then they have to, at the end of the day, decide when it is for them. I made that mistake back in 2016 by not believing Satoshi, and no one really took any time to convince me. No one took any time to share that this might be the future, or this is the way I should go. And it took me 4 years to figure it out. And I very well believe I'd be in a different position if I hadn't made that decision. But I had a point where I did make that decision. And I think the future is going to be very bright for not only Web3, but crypto and blockchain alike. And whether you're here or not, it is going to be here with or without you. The only difference is you have to decide if you want to be a part of it. So with that quote by Satoshi, that concludes today's presentation. Again, my name is Sigmund. You can find me on LinkedIn. My name is just Sigmund Holtz. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Sigmund_Holtz. Or if you have any questions as well, I'd love to be able to answer them. Feel free to shoot me an email at sigmund.holtz@gmail.com. That's sigmund.holtz@gmail.com. And I will try over the weekend or by the end of next week to get back to every single person that either DMs me or messages me as well. So with that, I just want to take 1 second to also thank the organizers of this event. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak today. It's been a passion of mine for a long period of time, and I love having the opportunity to speak both in person and online at different events to just further blockchain education, further the knowledge of people in the space, and really push it forward and really just kind of offer a hand to anyone that wants it, because that's something unfortunately I didn't have, and I hope that I can provide to all of you today. So thank you again for your time, and I'd love to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, sir, for introducing us to this amazing universe of blockchain. Hopefully, our participants must have grasped some interesting knowledge on this topic. Now, we will begin with a brief Q&A session with sir. So, if you guys have any doubts or questions regarding the topic, feel free to comment down your queries in the chat box. Okay, so here is the question by Swikarti Giri. It's been argued that Web 3.0 will become highly money or capital centric, hence needs to be heavily monitored or monetized. What do you think?
It's a very good question, and I was at the way I'll answer this is not my own answer, but actually the answer of someone that's far more intelligent and wise than I am, and that's Kevin O'Leary. I had the brief ability to speak to him back in April of this year at Bitcoin 2022 in Miami, and he basically said roughly the following: is that in order to really gain mass adoption, we need to have institutions come into the space, because there are literally trillions of dollars, like trillion with a T, trillions of dollars that are sitting right now in institutional hedge funds or accounts that aren't in crypto. And when you get, actual regulation in the space, you will see that money flood in, and you will see something that we haven't seen in over a century. Now, the argument to that is we don't want it to become too governed to the point where the government can basically control every aspect of it, because it removes the need of decentralization, right? It removes that piece of enticing capabilities. However, I think that it's going to be a mix and conglomerate of both decentralized and centralized nature that will, at the end of the day, be a perfect balance and mix that we will see. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, I'd love to be able to answer it. You can tweet me at Sigmund_Holtz or email me as well.
So next we have a question from Sairaj Parke. How are seed phrases and private keys connected?
Great question. So seed phrases and private keys are connected because the seed phrase is basically the alphabetical way that you can prove that you own the private key or the signature. So the private key is your signature, but you're probably not going to remember, it's for example, like, let me use the analogy of a bank card. Your bank card number, which I guarantee, unless you're you memorize things, you're probably not going to know what that number is. It's probably 16 digits long and you have no clue. But that bank card is like your seed phrase. So if you have that bank card, you go to the bank, it doesn't matter if you know the number or not, you have the ability to prove that you own the private key. So it's a way to basically prove it in a way that's simple for humans to understand.
Okay. Next question is by Sahil Saini. What's your take on high carbon footprints rates from mining crypto? How can we sustain it?
Great question. So, there's a lot of debate around this, and I'm going to be honest, I don't agree with actually most people on this. So a lot of people would say, and I see the next question here as well, so I'll try and answer both of them at one point. is proof of work is way more energy. It takes more energy. It's more consuming. Now, proof of stake, on the other hand, is less consuming of energy. But that being said, at the end of the day, compared to the industry size, it takes a lot of energy, right? Like compared to like blockchain in general, it's only a 1 trillion, like $1.5 trillion industry. It's tiny. For record, the stock market, the global GDP of the world is $10 trillion. Like plus the United States is single-digit trillions at least. So we're looking at the whole crypto market being the GDP of 1 year of the gross domestic product of the United States of America. So in retrospect to the industry, yeah, there's a high carbon footprint. In retrospect to modern finance, if you think of all the oil, gas, fossil fuels, electricity that keeps the stock market alive, that's all of those companies functioning. That's all their systems functioning, their databases, the people that work, the people that go to school, that drive, all of that in comparison. It's a very small amount of energy that we're releasing, but in comparison to what's actually being done, it's a very high amount. Just to end that question though, I think it's worth it considering where the future is going. We should do things like switch Ethereum to proof of stake to make it more efficient and effective, but it's something that has been done, and I think that the innovation is going to outweigh the detriments.
So next up, we have a question from Kiran Pal. How we can store our cryptocurrencies offline on our devices, and is it safe?
Great question, definitely. So yeah, and also keep leaving your questions, please, as well. I'm happy to try and get through as many as we can. I'll try and go quickly because I want to make sure I can. So you can basically have what's called a ledger or Trezor wallet, or there's so many others. You can literally go to ledger.com, or don't quote me on that exactly. Ledger, look it up on the internet. It'll be the main link. If not, you can ask me or email me, and I can send you the proper link. And basically, the ledger, it's like a USB stick. So you have that USB stick that holds your private key. So your private key will never touch the internet. Your crypto is stored on the blockchain, but the ability to command it to move or to transfer is through the private key, and that signature is never online. So the ability to hack it is much less. Can it still be hacked? Yes, technically, but it's unless you're dealing with tens of millions of dollars and people know who you are and you're going to get targeted, very rare that it would happen. So even for myself, not that I want to say too much, but I have many of them, like even a dozen of them, and in each wallet there might only be a couple $1,000s. So if one gets compromised, it doesn't really matter because there's so many of them. So that's something that I do.
Okay, the next question is by Sanika Hiroji. Where are the users most at risk of losing funds if an attack happens?
That would most likely be a bridge. So bridges are pretty risky, but in addition to bridges, there's also a few other ways that people can lose funds. So bridges are probably number one, but also any DeFi application, any centralized exchange that you don't have your keys to is risky. It's more risk than you would want to take on with a high amount of money. As I said, I've literally had people in my circle. I'm not going to obviously name who they are or say anything about them, but they've had money lost because they had it in a hot wallet or they had it on their Chrome extension and someone was able to compromise their computer. And that's why I often would recommend use lots of different wallets online, but also in addition to that, make sure you're not storing more than a few hundred or a few $1,000s, if whatever you can really afford to lose with nothing severe.
So next up, we have this question from Dude, that is DAO another centralization where the bigger investors control the process?
So a DAO is a centralized autonomous organization. So it's similar to a company, but in blockchain, where you have the ability to basically have control of an entity. The entity could invest funds. It could use funds to create NFT projects. It could donate money. It could do whatever you want. And very similar, if someone has the majority ownership, yes, they have the ability to control it and centralize. The bigger investors will have more of a say. For example, there are some very popular DAOs. I'm not going to name them because, again, I don't really want to go down that route. But there are some very big DAOs that do not emphasize that they are mainly controlled by one or two people, but they are. So let's say someone says, oh, I own 49% of the DAO. It's not 51, but it's 49. So everyone thinks, oh, it's decentralized. That's great. That's great. That's great. But at the end of the day, if one of their friends comes along and gets 2% of it, you got 51% now. So between the two of them, they now have control of the DAO, something that you ideally wouldn't want in a perfect scenario.
There is another question by Dude. Is there any way to recover funds sent lost by sending to unsupper wallets?
Good question. Kind of. It depends. So there's lots of different ways that this can be done. Let's say you send money, you send $100 to a wallet and you mistype the wallet. If that wallet doesn't exist, right, there's a very good chance that you're not going to ever send the money because there's no way that the transaction would go through. Because if there's no existing wallet, if you just type in a random words as the public key, it's not going to go anywhere. But if you type in a public key that's valid and it goes there, because there's already all the public keys and all the wallets are in existence. All with Ethereum, there's no more that have to be created. And there's literally, I can't even tell you how many, very, very large numbers. And that being said, if you send it, there's a period of time where, yes, you can cancel the transaction because if the network hasn't verified that that transaction has gone through, you can pull it back. But it's a very short amount of time. And normally it would be seconds or maybe a minute. But if that gets validated, it's done. The only way to reverse it is if you have 51% control and you could go back, undo the transaction, do a new transaction, verify it, have the network verify it, and then move forward.
So there's this next question from Shivansh. How you see blockchain future in India?
It's a good question. So I've never been to India. It's somewhere that one of the individuals I work with has gone many times. I've worked with a lot of people from India. I've never been there myself. It's definitely something I should do one day. But that being said, I think India, like actually to be very honest with you, is going to be very, very big in the future, even regardless of blockchain. You know, there's a lot of people, a lot of innovation that's going on and a lot of things that are happening. And I have a feeling that it's going to be still quite major. That being said, with blockchain, it just depends on the regulations and restrictions, right? If the government continues to be harsh or really lax with the restrictions, you'll see more or less investment come to India. You'll see more or less innovation come as well. And in my opinion, you're going to want more free rules, less centralization, and more benefits to people that want to build in crypto. And if that happens, and that happens even more, I think it doesn't matter where in the world you are. But India has a lot of great people. They have a lot of innovative technology, and it very well could become very, very powerful in the blockchain space in the next few years.
I think we are done with all the questions. We had like to thank Sir Sigmund Holtz for joining us today and addressing and enlightening the participants through this interesting talk on blockchain.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much again for having me. And just lastly, if there are any questions that I didn't get to answer, because I know there's a lot here on the side as well, please do feel free. Just once again, you can follow me on LinkedIn. You can send a message there or email me at sigmund.holtz@gmail.com or tweet me at Sigmund_Holtz on Twitter as well, and I'll get back to you. Thank you guys once again. It's been an absolute pleasure. I just want to say thank you for having me as a speaker.
I would like to present you with a small token of gratitude from our side.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So guys, it's quiz time. Buckle up to attempt this quiz. The link for which you can access in the YouTube live chat box, and the link will be closed after 30 minutes. Give your best.
So, with this amazing session has now come to an end. We thank you, sir, for giving us your valuable time and cooperation and to be a part of Epsilon 2022. Also, we have an interesting session coming on cybersecurity where you will get a lot of information and be exposed to new ideas. We'd like to express our gratitude to our sponsors for their support, starting with IMFS, our title sponsors, the first institution in India to provide expert coaching for exams including the GRE, GMAT, SAT, TOEFL, IELTS, and PTE, is IMFS, which was founded in 1997. They offered expert counseling sessions as well as a platform with a large and active alumni network and strong connections to more than 500 institutes globally.
Next up, we have Aurora Coaching Center. Coaching is our educational partner. The goal of Aurora Coaching, a crypto coaching firm, is to inform and raise knowledge about the world of cryptocurrencies among both individual and organizations so that both can approach it with confidence.
Our streaming partner is StreamYard. On the StreamYard platform, you may broadcast over social networks directly from your browser. Before choosing the premium plans to gain access to more features, it provides a free option that you may test out.
Thank you for being such a great audience. We wish you all the luck for your upcoming endeavors and hope to see you in our next session of Epsilon 2022.